Great. Sorry about that. Hey, everybody. Great to be here. I'm going to keep it super fast as well. I'm going to go through a lot of slides. These are meant to be conversation starters and question starters. Find me later to talk more about it. So I'm going to talk about how to accelerate the neurotech field as a whole, why it's super critical, and specifically how right now in this moment, we need a lot of field building and specific grant programs and grant structures to get a lot of work done fairly quickly. So thanks to a lot of folks that happen to be in this room, we have an extremely good vision into the future of what I think this is like the most important graph that humanity should be paying attention to. It plots the computational complexity going up, of course, and then specific estimates of what it would take to simulate a whole human brain, depending on different models of fidelity. And basically, I think we're entering this, like what I like to call the fun zone, where several technologies, AGI, brain-computer interfaces, and whole brain emulation become possible or likely. Without kind of getting into the tar pit of estimation and various assumptions and whatnot, I'll just post my guesses here. I very much think AGI is AGI that can outcompete a random human at a randomly sampled cognitive task is basically here already, and that a model that can outcompete all humans at all tasks is likely in the next 0 to 15 years possible now, meaning we're actually quite close. BCIs, I think, we have basic motor control things already. We have extremely high throughput transformative BCIs possible in the likely in the next 30 years, possible in the next 10. And with whole brain emulation, I think this is different degrees of scales of animal models will be likely in the next 15, 20, 30 years. But I think they're possible in much faster timelines. And this is one of those cases where if you want to greatly accelerate a field, you can do that. Humanity has shown that we can do that in the past. Space race is a great example of that. There are other examples. And I think we could make an extremely fast progress on this if we focus. I kind of try to think of these three fields as interrelated, of course. Let's learn from the AI field. AI really required a certain level of hardware. But what I think is the most important accelerant here was not actually the hardware getting better, it was the cash flow being unlocked. Meaning once it became very clear to a lot of large-scale organizations that a large cash flow was possible, we got a massive acceleration in the field that transformed the rate at which algorithm development happened and hardware development happened. So humanity right now in the 21st century is basically bottlenecked on finding specific cash flows that are near enough term, and at that point you can get a great acceleration in a field. So I personally think that whole brain emulation is probably the highest leverage thing that humanity has to be able to make in the short term for safety is kind of like a vague word. The compressed version here is I think it would be extremely, extremely good for humanity to try and get whole brain emulation as quickly as we can. I think roughly the timeline when you plot it out from many people's perspective looks roughly something like this. Maybe we'll get a simulation of a mouse by the end of this decade, maybe a little bit later. We might be able to get a primate sometime late in the 2030s. We might be able to get a human in the 2040s or later. This is already really aggressive. Most people, when have an intuition that this is like 60, 80 years out, but they would have said the same about extremely powerful AI models 10, 20 years ago. So I think this stuff is not nearly as far away as people think it is today. Things are a lot closer. But ideally, we would like to do something much faster. I think this is possible, just not likely. Right, so the second line is much more likely. It would be great to be able to get to that. I think we need faster R&D processes. Without going too deeply into this, we've shown in many examples how we can do extremely fast-paced R&D on massive scale projects involving lots of hardware, software, science in some cases. And I think we can do this massive scale engineering extremely quickly if we can unlock cash flows. So from my perspective, these are sort of the rough scales that you need in order to be able to fund different kinds of outcomes. You can start a few teams and get some significant breakthroughs in kind of the $10 million scale. You can start funding more teams and get to like larger scale breakthroughs in the 50 to 100 million scale. If you really want to be able to do the major lab type of efforts, today you need funding in the scale of billions. Things like OpenAI, DeepMind, and Anthropic, and so on are examples of being able to do this in fairly short timescales with that level of capital. And so when you think about the whole lifetime of one of those AI startups today, they are on the scale of 10 billion in funding. And again, in order to be able to tap that level of capital today, you do need a pathway to some kind of large cash flow, at least in the way that humanity is organized today. A lot of people have gotten stuck in the tar pit of trying to change how humanity is organized. I don't think we have the time for that anymore. So I think if you want to have the whole field level accelerant that something like the AI field is seeing right now, you then start hitting the $50 to $100 billion cash funding scales, and at that point, the set of parties that you can really think about in being able to bankroll such a thing is fairly small. So note that the AI companies had to couple with the large-scale tech giants today. That was basically the only available move to move at that speed. National governments just are not able to do that kind of R&D acceleration anymore, at least not in the peacetime or like Cold War style conditions. You can only really get that in early Cold War, is kind of like space race type conditions. Like that could provide this kind of acceleration, and we might yet see that in AI development. Could be possible for neurotech and so on. I don't know. I doubt it. I think these days any kind of war scenario goes straight into AI and not into neurotech. But to kind of illustrate the scale of the problem here, the total funding in the world towards R&D, adjusted by GDP, basically looks something like this. And this is just the US outlook. You can multiply all these graphs roughly by 3 or 4, and you get the whole world outlook. As a fraction of GDP, government funding is decreasing over time, and industry is increasing. And so for the most part, corporations are doing a lot of this kind of R&D development. So in order to drive this kind of fast-paced development, we need to be able to unlock those kind of cash flows. And that means that the existing corporations of today are probably likely to be some of the ones that are going to be bankrolling a lot of the technology development that we need. That seems like really far away, right? Because most of the companies that exist right now seem far away from neurotech. But they're not. So what I would recommend here is a similar coupling to the AI and large tech company and large hardware developers with some of the neurotech companies. The AI companies themselves definitely want improvements in the neurotech field and emulation fields, and there might be a similar coupling here that's available. The problem, though, as many people will point out, that kind of all those corporate alignments create all kinds of safety, really deep problems. So I'm just kind of saying this is the possibility space that we have to leverage. You have to do it like very consciously and very carefully to not end up in really bad outcomes. But the broad point is, today, I think we can get fairly far in key breakthroughs through philanthropy, angel impact investors, and that type of work. And that can truly accelerate the field in a huge way. We might be able to leverage national funding. I'm very skeptical of the timelines there, but it is possible, especially if you motivate to specific, DARPA-inspired groups like ARIA and others. I think those are possible. But at some point, you get to a scale where VC might help, but even VC is just not capable of funding this, and you really start having to hit the large-scale tech companies and those large-scale cash flows. So this is roughly how the potential funder scale maps onto the scale of capital that these projects are going to need. So I think field building work has been tremendously helpful in lots of fields, of course, but especially in whole brain emulation. Right now, we have a lot of the outlook illuminated in terms of what are the possible pathways. We need to do more of this in terms of finding key targets in the short to medium term. And coordinating and creating Schelling points for parties to go and pursue specific key technical breakthroughs. So, an ask for the group here is like, please do more field building. Let's update the roadmaps. Get to very concrete near-term projects. We now have more structures for funding these kinds of projects. Distill these kind of ideas into very concrete, short-term oriented proposals that could be built, started, funded, and operated in a 3 to 5 year time frame. And we need more, especially right now, more philanthropy-oriented prizes or grants to be able to stimulate the early areas of a field, while it's still super far away from any kind of potential applications that can unlock the larger cash flows. One plug here, Neve has been working on a really key project here, which is to do a whole brain emulation fast grants program. And we're helping grow this. We have raised a large chunk of money already. We aim to raise, this is private for this group, but semi-private. Don't tweet this out. We're trying to get to the scale of like 20 million-ish. We think that with that level of scale of funding, we can make significant impact in the field right now. More better, of course. We're putting our money where our mouth is. Like we're funding a lot of this. Please, if you're a funder and want this to happen in the shorter term, contribute to this program or do your own funding of this field. And then second ask here would be people working in the neurotech field start thinking of specific kinds of projects that could net very significant results in the next 2 to 5 years. We're going to be looking for that kind of thing. This program will also have like this grand prize structure to it for like these major efforts, like emulating a whole brain or a whole mouse and things like that. So the last plug that I will give is because of the results of ML in the last 10 years and in the next 10 years, please leverage every single, or not every single, but like the major results that are appearing to greatly accelerate your own R&D. We can now do R&D at a much faster pace than we could 5 years ago. Humans are particularly bad at updating on these kinds of moments. Qualitatively, science today is very, very different than 5 years ago. What you can do now is like substantially different. It's hard to get it to work, but when you can get it to work, you get incredible outputs. So tap into the ML AI community, especially those who are like thinking deeply about the very low levels of the training algorithms or training architectures. Work with the folks doing biochem or cell simulations. Those will be extremely helpful to understand how to simulate whole neurons and then collections of neurons. And then, really work with the groups doing larger scale neural tissue simulations. The better, higher fidelity models that we can get in the small to medium scale, the better the large scale stuff is going to go. Cool. That was a lot. Happy to talk more about it later.
Okay, let's take one question.
It's probably very good. Do you think do you think most funding should go into advancing scanning methods?
It's a good question. I actually don't have a strong opinion here because history shows that the most important thing is to unlock the R&D or the long-term R&D oriented cash flow. And there are a lot of ways that you can get there. So for example, you could go towards stronger whole brain emulation by going through BCI first. BCI has much very direct earlier stage applications that are very connected to strong cash flows. And so you could have organizations that achieve very large scale breakthroughs in BCI first that are prioritizable in a shorter term outlook and take that same exact team and orient it towards whole brain emulation. And so a good example of this might be Tesla now making Optimus, relatively similar problem, easy to reorient the team. SpaceX making Starlink. Starlink is a much bigger cash flow than like the launch business, and like that's bankrolling SpaceX for a while. And so think of it kind of like that. You could have groups that are BCI funded to do whole brain emulation. So the most important part is to unlock the cash flow, is basically what I'm trying to say. And it's just for the last 20 to 30 years, that's been the dominant form that we can get large-scale acceleration. Now, as the talks earlier today were saying, there are really bad failure modes in that. You don't want kind of private, secretive corporate R&D, especially that gets locked into the hands of a few. You really want broad-scale, more public-oriented science. It's just that right now the tools that traditional public goods science has just don't work for public goods engineering. We don't have the equivalent of a SpaceX or a Tesla today that is just oriented towards public goods engineering, and changing that is at the scale of changing massive scale governments. And I just think it's we're gonna get AGI first.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.